The results of the 2016 presidential election had, how should we say, mixed reviews from the American public. And really, this is to be expected from such an event. However, what really distinguished the reaction of this particular election from all others was the degree of the reaction. But what exactly was it about this event that made it so explosive? Well, the answer again is history. That is, the reactions to the 2016 elections was merely the cumulative tension of a much deeper conflict, whose origins go back much earlier into history. Needless to say, humans haven't changed much in the last 1700 years. For in many respects, it is this situation we see happening in the aftermath of Nicea. That is, similar to how the 2016 election results caused an uproar amongst many Americans, so too did many within the church respond unfavorably to the results of Nicea. And this unfavorableness would manifest itself in various ways. So for example, a person goes in to buy some bread at the bakery, and as they are being handed their bread, the seller proclaims something to the extent of, "By the way, the Father is greater than the Son." Or let's take another situation. During a festival gathering, someone gives a public speech to the crowd, and at the very end announces, "And I just wanted to add by saying, there once was a time when the Son was not," and then marches off stage. Now, it's not so much that many who took issue with the results of Nicea were unorthodox in their theology, so much as they took issue with the way in which it was expressed and what aspects it placed more focus upon. So what was all the fuss about? Well, in principle, we could perhaps sum up the conflict with two words: homoousia and hypostasis. And in a similar way that words such as capitalism and Marxism evoke negative connotations for us in the 20th and 21st centuries, so too did the terms homoousia and hypostasis create a lot of heat within the church of the 3rd and 4th centuries. Homoousia as represented by the modalists and hypostasis as represented by the Arians. However, it is very important that I stress here that these two views represented the extreme positions. That is, while the views of modalism and Arianism were indeed existing views, they nevertheless represented views held by a very tiny minority. In fact, as history tells us, all but 2 of the 318 bishops present who attended the Council of Nicea were in agreement with the tenets of the Nicene Creed set out concerning the relationship between God the Father and Christ the Son. The real majority consisted of those views that fell between these two extremes, and it is amongst this majority that the real battle and conflict for orthodoxy will take place. Well, in addition to these two extreme views, there were also several others. Now, this is where things get really sticky. Because when we're talking strictly about modalism on the one hand, and Arianism on the other, things are, relatively speaking, clear-cut. It's when we get into the views that lie between these extremes that things become, how should we say, incredibly complicated. And so owing to this complication, resulted various views that could be placed anywhere along a spectrum between these two extremes. Now remember, there is perhaps an infinite number of views with regards to the relationship between the Father and the Son. Moreover, many of these categories are artificial. That is, they were not always self-designated titles. Rather, these labels have been created by modern scholars to help sort out what exactly was happening during this time. Nevertheless, we could perhaps sum up the 4th century church into these 5 main categories. As we said earlier, the modalists believed that the Father and the Son were not just one being, but also one person. And that Father and Son were not themselves distinct persons, but rather masks or roles played by one and the same God. The word modalists used to express this relationship between Father and Son was homoousia. On the other extreme, The Arians reacted to this view by stating that the Father and the Son were not only distinct persons, but also entirely different beings from one another. However, in order to do this, required that the Son be a created being. The Arians expressed this relationship between the Father and the Son to be heterousia, that is, different substances or beings, in reaction to the modalist view, homoousia. However, Arians preferred to express this relationship with a synonym of ousia, hypostasis. That is, the Father and the Son are two separate hypostases. In reaction to this, the Nicenes, as they would later become known as, reaffirmed the oneness of the Father and Son as expressed in the term homoousia. However, how they were distinct from one another was not clearly defined at Nicea. And therefore, due to this lack of clarity between Father and Son, inevitably resulted in the rise of yet another group who accused the Nicenes of modalism. Their logic was that by using the term homoousia, they were essentially saying that Father and Son were one and the same. Therefore, in order to safeguard the distinction between the persons, this group preferred to use the term homoiousia, meaning of a similar substance or being. But what exactly does that even mean, similar? You can probably already see problems arising from this. And it is for this reason that they later became known as Semi-Arians. For while they had tendencies resembling Arianism in part, they nevertheless did not go to the extreme as expressed by Arianism. Additionally, like Arianism, Semi-Arianism upheld the idea that Father and Son were two hypostases. Now, as a brief side note, I want to reiterate that omission of the Holy Spirit here is purely for sake of simplicity in explanation. Well, it's between these two groups, the Nicenes and the Semi-Arians, that much of the conflict throughout much of the 4th century centers. Now, the pure irony of the matter here was that while the Nicenes were accusing the Semi-Arians of Arianism, and the Semi-Arians were accusing the Nicenes of modalism, neither side was one or the other. And this is a fairly typical situation that occurs whenever polarization within a large group arises. And the reason for this is that both groups are viewing the other side from their perspective. That is, they don't have this overarching bird's eye view of the situation as we have here. Rather, the group of the middle left is seeing the group of the middle right merged with the extreme right, and the group of the middle right is seeing the group of the middle left merged with the extreme left. Now, indeed, they differed on views and emphasis. There's no question about this. Rather, how much they differed was what was being misunderstood and therefore exaggerated by the other side. Moreover, both were emphasizing aspects of God's nature that were equally important. And to ignore or minimize either one or the other was equally detrimental to the faith. That is, God is both three and one at the same time. But then how is this possible? How can God be simultaneously three and one? Well, it is from members of this fifth and final group that our answer arises. And it is to this fifth and final group that we now focus our attention. I invite all questions and comments in the discussion section, so please feel free to write or ask any questions below. Thanks.